Okay, let's kick off. It looks like pretty much everyone's here now. Thanks everyone, and thanks for joining us on our next tasting, our next online tasting, where tonight we're going to travel to the Barossa, which, as Reid Bosward, who's joining us this evening, has just informed me, I didn't realise just how cold it actually gets there in the winter, but it's a great thing for the vines. So, Reid, I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Reid. Reid and I have known each other for many, many years, and he's an absolute legend of a man, a very knowledgeable individual, but also one of the most down-to-earth winemakers I've ever met, and absolute killer to boot. He's a fantastic bloke and can drink an absolutely enormous amount of Barossa Shiraz. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be drinking Barossa Shiraz. And on a night like tonight, why wouldn't we be? So, Reid, I'm just going to throw to you, first of all, sorry, before we do that, quick introduction to my colleague Luke, who unfortunately we've had a light go out in our tasting room at work, so he's half in the dark. He'll be able to see. And I'm just putting up on the screen here. So we're doing a little competition tonight. So just text your name, email, and favourite wine to email it to Luke, and let us know which one is your favourite wine. And we'll be drawing someone's name at the end of the night, and you'll be winning a bottle of wine. So you'll be winning a bottle of that wine that is your favourite wine, so even better. So we will kick off, first of all, by throwing over to the man, the myth, the legend, Reid Bosward. Over to you, Bozzy.
Well, it's very flattering. Thank you, Mark. First, I just apologise. We've only just got mobile phone service in the Barossa, so this was always going to be a bit of a challenge. But so if it freezes up every now and then, it's frozen now, but I apologise. But so you're just after a bit of history of Kaesler?
If you wouldn't mind, mate, just a bit of I mean, we've got on the image here, Kaesler's been established since 1893, so there's obviously a lot to cover there. But yeah, a bit of a history, if you wouldn't mind, mate.
Yeah, sure. So, Barossa was originally established in 1834 and by sort of German migrants from Silesia, and they kept coming down in waves. The original reason for them sort of migrating to South Australia was they were being persecuted for being Lutheran, believing in a particular version of the Lutheran Bible. They came from this Prussia and Silesia area. They had been basically threatened by a guy called King Frederick III, and King Frederick had decreed that if they continued to practice their religion in the way that he didn't see fit, he was going to kill them all, so they left. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that they sort of left and came to the Barossa with all this winemaking gear strapped to their back and just started producing wine, but they didn't. One of the reasons why they came to Australia is because of religious freedom, and so hence they came. So the first boatload came down in 1834, I think it was, and then they continued to migrate. In about 1891, a guy called Gottlieb Kaesler had migrated down to Australia, again with his Lutheran heritage and religion in mind. By the time he got here, the villages had already been established, so Angaston, Newry, Tanunda, so on and so forth. And when he arrived, he came, his trade was actually as a bootmaker, shoemaker. But by the time he got there, that sort of position had already been filled in the various towns. So like a lot of them, he turned himself into what we call down here is a share farmer. So he took a tract of land from the Crown. Well, actually, it wasn't from the Crown. It was from a thing called the Adelaide Company, which had from the Crown taken out a big chunk of land that it couldn't work itself. So it share farmed it out to anyone that came along. And these migrants basically leased the land for no money. But a share farming arrangement or an agreement is whereby you get to keep a limited amount of produce for yourself, i.e. enough to get you through to the next year. And anything beyond a set rate was delivered to the company, which they would then take as rent or lease or for profit. So Gottlieb arrived in 1893 and established the Kaesler farm. So the actual building I'm sitting in at the moment was the old family homestead. We've actually just recently renovated it. But I think, again, getting back to some of the misconceptions, when he started here, he would have planted the things that were absolutely necessary. So he would have planted an orchard, he would have had pigs, he would have had various sort of things that they would need to sort of get them through the year. They used to grow wheat for flour, they used to make candles, used to do all sorts of those subsistence type things. But coming from Europe, they were always so used to having wine on the table, like everyone around the area. He planted an acre or two of vines, in this case 3, which was planted in 1893, hence the establishment in 1893. And his life just went on from there. So originally from that mixed farm, which was 24 acres, where he had 3 acres of vineyard and the rest of it was producing food, over time, grapes became more and more popular, and the whole farm got planted out to grapes. And it stayed in Kaesler hands until 1999 when we purchased it. So skipped over a few world wars and things there, but and they were important too. But that's a quick brief history of the Barossa and Kaesler.
Fantastic. And mate, how long have you been there for?
So we purchased the place in November 1999. I had a pretty liquid weekend with a couple of Swiss bankers who became friends. And anyone that's in the wine business fully understands that the old saying is, if you want to end up with a small fortune in the wine business, start with a big one, because they just eat money. So it's always good to have a few Swiss pesos and a few Swiss bankers in the system. And we sort of sat down and struck an agreement. The Kaesler vineyard I had already been buying grapes for another large conglomerate, and was always impressed by them. And when it came up for sale, I rang these guys and said, how about it? And they decided that they really wanted to do it. So we purchased it in 99, originally then 24 acres. Gottlieb had actually bought 2 other farms adjacent to Kaesler. He had 5 sons and he bought 5 farms for his 5 sons. And we've since bought 3 of them to try and restore the original estate. Mark,
I think
I've lost you, Mark.
Sorry, I had my thing on mute. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Coming through loud and clear.
Beautiful. So we've got at least, hopefully, we've got the 2 Bogans, the 2018 Bogan and the 2014 Bogan, in our glasses now, ready to go. So we're going to run through the Bogan vineyard. Now we've actually got a little interactive little map that we're going to show you guys, and it's going to give you a bit of an idea, because we want to give you a bit of an idea of where we are in the world, where the specific vineyards, because the wines that we're tasting tonight, they're all sourced from very specific vineyards, very specific vine ages, very specific regions, sub-regions of the Barossa. So we're just going to have a little look here at...
Sorry.
Yep.
Do you want me to start sharing my screen here, Mark?
Absolutely, mate. I'm just going to take it off mine.
Fantastic.
Go to you, Luke. Go for it.
Okay. So perhaps, Reid, if you can just kind of give us a commentary. Obviously, here we've got South Australia, and you can see Adelaide right there, and I've put a couple of pins in where Kaesler is located in the Barossa. Mark and Reid, seeing as you're not muted, you're okay and you can see those fine, I'm assuming? Yep, brilliant. So we'll just zoom into Kaesler now.
So it might be a little bit slow, boys and girls, but we'll get there. But just to give you a bit of an idea of where we are in the world, yeah.
So Reid, I've just pinned the Woms vineyard there in the younger of the 2 Bogan vineyards. Perhaps you could kind of tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's really the whole philosophy that we've got at Kaesler. First and foremost, we're a Barossa winery, obviously, but we unashamedly want to make an Australian style of wine. I've worked across the planet. I've worked in France, in various regions in France. Bordeaux, Burgundy, all of the big names, Spain, South Africa, Russia, the whole smash. And I always wanted to do something. The wines that have always impressed me are the wines that are basically estate wines. So what we wanted to do was come up with our own sort of version of Burgundy, if you like. I always say that the Barossa is more Burgundy than Burgundy. Everyone's always impressed. Everyone's always very, very impressed by just how complex Burgundy can be. But I can promise you that Barossa Valley is even more complex. And if you look at that Bogan vineyard there, that's actually a case in point. You can actually see the difference. That must have been very early in the season, but just in the springtime, the canopies aren't too big. But you can also see the different marks in the soil there. So where the red stuff is, that's a bit more clay. And when the lighter stuff is, that's a little bit more sand. And those things give you a lot of differences. Sandier soils tend to give you a sort of brighter, more aromatic tone to the wine. But sometimes the tannin can be a little bit squeaky, a little bit light. But clay will actually give you a lot richer style of wine. So that vineyard works very, very well together. Sometimes we'll actually pick that vineyard 3 different ways to get 3 different wines, and then we'll consider blending them at the end.
So, Reid, if I could just jump in for a second there, mate. So, you can clearly see that differentiation between the white sand, which I would call in the kind of southern, southwestern corner.
Yep.
I can also see there's a different gradation as well that kind of cuts diagonally almost through the middle of the vineyard there. And it looks like it's almost darker clay and lighter clay within there. Is that just there's a slightly wetter section and a dry section, or is that another kind of striation between that?
I think what you've got there is a bit of runoff from the road. So if you look at that, I'm doing it with my cursor. But if you look just sort of southwest from the pin, I'd say there's just a little bit more moisture just about there. And this is where having your own vineyard. So the big companies will just pick the whole block, and take the whole thing, and there'll be no sort of differentiation through it. For us, we'll actually probably keep that little bit separate and ferment that in a tiny little fermenter and just see. And it might actually make a very, very good wine, but it might not as well. So we look for all those differences in vigour throughout the vineyard. We're a very different business to a lot of other wineries. Most winemakers will come out, with 1 week before harvest is due to be picked. It's the first time they've been in the vineyard all year. And I'll say, we actually want to wait another 3 weeks. And you sort of say, why? It's going to be ready next week. But the truth is their winery's full, or they've got some other big excuse to not pick your vineyard at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas our vineyard manager, he'll come and just take out that little bit there. We'll nip that bit off, and then we'll take bits and pieces and just ferment it in tiny, tiny little fermenters. And then keep those separated the whole process into barrels. I'll just show you another thing. I'll just see if I can get this up. See that?
I'll just pin your video here, Reid, and stop sharing mine so we can get you on full screen. It might be a little bit better there.
Yeah.
We got you there, mate. Yep.
So that picture there, that's the different soils across just Tanunda. That's not the Barossa Valley. That's just Tanunda. So from there to there, you're talking about maybe just a kilometre or 2.
Wow.
And that just shows you the variations. That was actually done by a guy in 1954 called Alan Northcote. He actually came up with those maps on all the different soils simply with a shovel. He was just a very, very committed dirt guy. That's a little poster that comes from the back of a book that he wrote, which I think quite possibly would have to be one of the most boring books you'd ever read in your life. A little picture at the back's really, really cool. But it just gives you an idea of just how complex and how vastly different the soils can be. And again, we're a small company and we can't compete with Penfolds or Orlando or those guys with, just sheer business and economies of scale. So we've got to outfox them in other ways. And so we do things that they can't. So by picking small, tiny amounts of wine and grapes and keeping those things separate and then starting to detail it through different oak barrels and so on and so forth, that's how we try and outfox those guys.
Fantastic.
Another one.
We might go back to Oh, there's another one. Yep.
Yeah.
Is that the larger Barossa?
No, that's just another round of town.
Wow.
So I fibbed before. The first one was actually around Lindock. The second one was around Tanunda. Anyway, the point is that there's a lot of different soils, and if you put the effort in, you can actually make some really, really interesting wines. And again, it's just a way of us trying to do things. You know, if you're going to charge $50 for a bottle of Bogan, I'd like you guys to know and think that we're actually putting a lot of effort in to make sure that we're making as good a wine as we possibly can for you.
Yeah. So I might actually just, Luke, if you wouldn't mind, I might just grab the screen back if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just going to put us back on the. Here we go. So that was a nice little video of where we are, and I think one of the greatest things, and one of the things I love about Kaesler here is we've got we've got the winery obviously on one side of the road, and then you've got the Bogan vineyard planted 1965 literally across the road. So you know that there's never going to be any quality issues regarding it sitting out in the sun or being sitting in a truck for too long. You know, you're definitely going to get it to the winery pretty quick. So the next one we'll talk about is, and I hope you guys are trying your wines here, seeing the older vintage and the newer vintage here. But now we're going to move to the next Bogan vineyard, which is actually the 1899 vineyard. So Luke, I'm just going to shoot it back over to you now, mate, and we'll go back onto the video if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem at all.
And we'll see the distance towards from where we are at the winery. Then we go kind of southwest towards the Bogan vineyard. Now this is that's Greenock Creek, which is a very famous creek in the background there.
It's the Greenock Creek.
And so this is another one. This is another one called the Bogan vineyard. Is that right, Reid?
Yeah. So we're the upside down L, if you can see it there, that vineyard's planted in 1899, and that's a really interesting vineyard because where the pin is actually is probably 3 meters lower than the right hand side of the vineyard, but down there, because it's close to the creek, there's actually a lot of gravel down there, which is not that normal for this part of the Barossa. In fact, gravel's not a feature of the Barossa generally at all, but being down by the creek, there's a lot of gravel there. So those vines are now, 125 years old or whatever they are. But they're quite interesting. They get a little bit vigorous down there, and those ones actually have got their toes in the water that's under the creek. As you move to the right or to the east, if you can just put your cursor, just up there, there's a lot more clay up there. We actually pick that vineyard 3 different ways and ferment them 3 different ways. And we think it's important, and they end up making really incredibly different wines.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
And everything on there was planted 1899.
Yeah, in that upside down L, Luke's just going to sort of run it. Yeah, that's it. That's sort of the delineation. Just below that, interestingly, is that vineyard there. That's actually a rootstock trial. So although we don't have any phylloxera in South Australia, we anticipate that one day we may. So in there we've got 6 different rootstocks, but with the same genetic material on top. So the upside down L, I think one of the really unique things about the Barossa Valley with Shiraz in particular is the actual genetic material that came to Australia came in the 1830s and the 1840s and the 1850s. And that was before European phylloxera. So if you actually have a look at a Shiraz leaf and a Shiraz bunch here in South Australia, it's different to anything you'll find in France, to the point where Chapoutier is actually now coming, I believe, and taking cuttings back to France, because in the phylloxera event, which they had in the 1890s, they lost a lot of their genetic material. So they're actually now coming back and getting it from South Australia, where they know that it's clean and pure. So we're actually taking those cuttings and putting that on top of various American rootstocks, just in case, so that if phylloxera ever comes, at least we know what to do and what we need to do next.
So is that called is that the insurance vineyard there then?
Yeah, well, it's probably not something I'll ever have to use, but it's for the kids, like if they get into, I would say at some stage that they're going to may have to face this as a business problem. And so with that, we actually are getting ahead of it. So most people are going to say, okay, what rootstock, when it happens, what rootstock, what scion, what genetic material. We already know pretty much what to do next if and when it happens.
So one of the interesting things that I'll quickly add on to what Reid's saying there is one of the most interesting and it's incredibly frustrating for those of us in the wine industry. So phylloxera is obviously it's a tiny little bug. Just to go back a step as to where we were. So, and it was brought across from the Americas actually when the discovery of the Americas was in full swing, because there are vines that are native to the Americas. And some explorers brought vines back, and they brought it back to London originally and grew it in one of the botanic gardens in London to see what American wine would taste like. They were just interested, not realizing, of course, that on the roots was this tiny little, almost microscopic bug that once it got loose, just decimated Europe. Actually decimated. I think there's some reports saying it was about 95% destruction of vines in Europe. So almost completely wiped it out entirely. So the issue that we have today with phylloxera, or that we've had for the last 150, 160 years, is the fact that there still today is no cure for it. You can't stop phylloxera. All you can do is, like what Reid just said, you can plant on rootstocks, which is the roots that live underneath the soil, plant on American rootstock. The American vines have a natural resistance to the phylloxera louse, and you can put an American base with a scion of a European top. And that's how we do it. In the majority of the world, that's how we do it. South Australia is very, very fortunate in that it doesn't have phylloxera as yet, as Bozzy was saying. But the issue is when phylloxera comes in, and we're seeing this in the Yarra Valley, literally as we speak, phylloxera is in the Yarra Valley and it is starting to go through. Because what happens is when phylloxera starts to come in, people say, oh shit, what are we going to do? We're going to put rootstock in. That's the only way we can grow grapes. It's the only way we can survive. But what you're doing is then you're creating an environment that is perfectly suited for phylloxera to spread. So phylloxera starts coming through your vineyard and you don't get any negative effects, but it sets up a nice, easy, comfortable environment for the phylloxera to go crazy and start breeding and moving. So as soon as one person puts the phylloxera resistant rootstock in, it's basically, that's the foothold and away it goes. So it's basically, it just sweeps through vineyard regions really, really quickly, because the only other option is basically to just grub up all of your vines and just poison the soil. That's the only way to stop them from coming in.
So get your Yarra Yarrings when you can.
It's
Mark, I'm going to throw back to you so we can do a bit of a compare and contrast on the two vintages of Bogan, if that works with everybody. So I'm just going to stop share.
Okay, I'll get my screen up. So we are going to move on to, so we're just going to talk quickly here with Bozzy about 2014 versus 2018 as vintages, because obviously we've controlled every other aspect of this. Everything's coming off the same vines from the same region. Obviously it's the same grape variety. They're obviously going to be a couple of years older in the 2018 wine, but we wanted to have a look at the vintage, the overall vintage. So I've taken a few quotes from the Barossa Wine Society, and it was just basically a really, really quick summary overall of 2014 and of 2018. So we'll just go through this quickly. This is Louisa Rose who wrote this this is available online through the Barossa Winemaker Association. So it was a tough vintage, 2014. And Bozzy, can you attest to that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they're all tough, but 2014 was a tricky one because we had a very dry winter, and although we don't really rely on irrigation that much, it was a year where a little bit of extra irrigation actually helped a lot. But it was one of those years where the growers always seemed to be chasing their tail. It was a very, very difficult one, and that all sounds very, very pessimistic, but it does manifest itself in whenever you get years like that, you tend to get wines that have a pretty strong backbone and a very strong spine. And I just remember them as young wines being very unyielding. You know, they looked like sort of Bordeaux style wines in the fact that they were giving nothing away, but the actual structure of them was fantastic. And we always knew that it was going to be a very, very good year. It wasn't a particularly large cropping year. In fact, a lot of growers really got quite heavily punished from a tonnes point of view, but the quality was absolutely fantastic. Not easy drinking when they were young, but I'd imagine that the 14s, I mean, it's just coming into its own now. And we always make a style of wine that you know, typically speaking, it's about age. Not many people are making the style to age anymore, but that's a style that we're wanting to persist with. But yeah, I always loved 14. It was a tricky one to navigate, and I think Lou's saying that there as in testament to the ability of both grapes and people to thrive under challenge. I think Louise is now the Grand Chancellor for the Barons, so she's got very good at being careful with her words. But it was a good year if you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, fantastic. So that, and I can definitely attest to that. I'm getting it's still fairly tightly wound, and it's still got, I can still see it's got a very, very long path ahead, definitely. But with 6 years in the bottle, I'm getting a lot more of those savoury characters, a little bit more leathery notes in it as well. So it's definitely starting to open up. And keen to hear the feedback from the team as well.
Well, just for the viewers, like don't be. I mean, it's going to be tough, I know, but don't be afraid to leave like half a glass overnight. I think you'll find that this wine, you know, particularly over the next couple of hours, but even well into the tomorrow evening, if you can leave some in the bottle, it'll reward. We find a lot of our reds. Like if I've got someone coming that I need to show the wine, I'll probably open a wine like that this afternoon before I go home for a tasting at lunchtime tomorrow.
Yep.
So it'll keep giving you stuff.
So absolutely fine. So so now we're just going to quickly talk about the 18. So as a compare and contrast, we've gone to the South Australian Wine and Grape Crush Survey, and we're talking about, again, you know, moderate to low rainfall. We were getting into, this was one of the first severe drought years we had from memory, and warmer than average days, incredibly warm in February. I remember that 2018 February, it was bloody hot. And then, of course, and very, very interestingly, I picked this out of the Grape Crush Survey for the Barossa, significantly higher nighttime temperatures. So we started this evening tonight, Bozzy and I were having the conversation of how cold it is down in the Barossa. He was saying it was -2 last night, which is incredibly cold, of course. So having a significantly higher nighttime temperature, I think, Bozzy, I'd love you to go into, if you could, why nighttime temperatures being lower and what effects that'll have having them higher.
So 2018 was an idiot-proof vintage. If you couldn't make good wine in 18, you might as well give it up. It was a pretty gentle year in the sense that you could pick when you wanted to, and that doesn't always happen. Normally, Mother Nature gives you a little tap somewhere along the line, and but that year she was busy doing something else, I guess. She gave us a bit of a rest. But what nighttime temperature does is, the warmer the night, the lower the acidity. And so a lot of malic acid, so there's two major acids in wine. One's called tartaric, the other one's called malic. The malic we eventually get out through the winemaking process, but typically when those grapes come in, the acidity is a little bit lower in the warmer night years. And it's very easily rectified, and a lot of winemakers don't like talking about it because they think that it's in some way it's taboo. But, you know, adding a little bit of tartaric acid back to a wine just helps bring so much balance to the wine. For me, it's akin to salt and pepper in cooking, you know. You only need a little bit of it to bring out a whole lot more flavour. And I think to be, as a winemaker, if you're going to ignore that, you're mad. And every winemaker around here adds it. I remember a French winemaker came down in 2002. He's since gone. But in 2002 was a year where you genuinely didn't have to add any acid. And he came down here and didn't have to add any acid and made these beautiful wines. They were fantastic. And the next 5 years afterwards added no acid and consequently made 5 dreadful years worth of wine after that. But he knew better. He came from France and he thought that us Aussies, we were just dumb. But, always listen to the locals if you can. But so warmer nights, lower acid, but the acid can be corrected. But warmer nights also means that you can pick a little bit earlier, which means you get a lot more flavour retention. And one thing we dislike at Kaesler intensely is sort of pruny, raisiny sort of characters. And we don't mind the warm years. It just means we can pick a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And one thing I always have respected Kaesler for, and your winemaking, mate, something I can see quite clearly is the fact that despite being in a very warm climate of the Barossa, there's very rarely any of those baked pruny characters in your wines. There's always a vibrancy and a freshness to it. And this 2018, I can definitely see that line of vibrancy and freshness, and that clear blue fruit character that it's very, very beautiful. So,
Mark, I don't like raisins. I don't like sultanas. I'll pick them out of my muesli. I can't stand the bloody thing.
they're like food or wine, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll use that as a nice pitch point for next time I'm introducing one of my clients to your wines, Reid.
Yeah, if you see it, let me know and I'll sack the winemaking team.
Just on that note, I'm really keen to get everyone involved. You've had a bit of feedback on the comments section. Danny's come back and actually said he's finding the 18 is a little bit more enjoyable than the 14, maybe a little bit more expressive. And obviously you alluded to vintage there, Reid. Would anyone else like to kind of jump on board with regards to a comment? You can unmute yourself or jump on the comments section. Just love to get people's feedbacks. I'm seeing, expressive. It's good.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Danny there. That the fruit character definitely comes through. I'm getting a lot more savoury now. I must admit, I've potentially jumped the gun a little bit here because I actually opened these last night. So these have actually had 24 hours to breathe for me. So, but that 2018 is still looking bright and fresh and young and yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, don't worry about those 14s. They're just a bit gnarly now, but I remember in 2007, the business was a little bit younger then, and it was really interesting 2007 because it was one of the lowest yielding years until 19 and 20, but the wines were incredibly tannic, and I just looked at them with I just loved them, but they were not easy drinks. But we couldn't sell anything, so I just put them in a dark spot, and we re-released them about 2 years ago. And everyone said, how these wines are fantastic. And of course, a lot of years had passed since 2007. I think it was nearly 10 years. And all of a sudden, everyone was onto it. So again, we're not just trying to make easy breezy, cheery wines. We're trying to make wines that reflect the season and have a bit of structure. And I unashamedly say that sometimes you just got to wait.
Yeah.
You just got to wait.
And that's something that you'll hear winemakers from the best regions in the world say. Sometimes you just got to wait. So with that, we're not going to wait. We're going to move on to the WOMs now. Because I see several open bottles. James, were you going to say something?
Yeah, sorry, Mark.
Right.
I wanted to jump in. Look, thanks. This is fantastic. First of the COVID tastings. So thanks for this. I'm finding the 14 is probably structurally a little more interesting. It's got sort of more redder fruits than the blue blacks of the 18. Mark, is that sort of something that you saw in these ones? More challenging year tends to produce a bit of a more interesting structural wine.
Absolutely, I see. I first of all on the fruit spectrum, I definitely see more of those clean, more obvious blue and black fruits, as you said in that 18. With the 14, I'm definitely getting more savoury, bay leaf, sage notes. It's more going to the fruit spectrum, which for me, and also it's in the tannin. The tannin in the 18, it's just a little bit more generous, a little bit more round, whereas it's very, very tight and linear in that 14. So that's directly due to the vintage, obviously.
Yeah.
And due to that kind of hang time, as the Americans call it, the amount of time that it's had on the vine to develop complexity, to develop colour, to develop tannin.
Yeah, and the colours between the two are very different. I know they're 4 years apart, but they're very different colours, which coming from the same block really does show the seasons having an influence, which is that's why we drink this stuff.
Absolutely. So thank you for your feedback there. So now we're going to move on to the WUMs. So this is a fantastic opportunity here, because the WUMs is not one that we see very often. This is only the second time I've ever tried a WUM. So I'm very, very grateful to be trying it. So I encourage you all to please pour yourself a glass of WUMs. And Bozzy, I'm just going to hand over to you to give us a bit of a background on what the WUMs is and where it kind of comes from.
Well, the real background is if you go back and look at Australian wine, and I've been fortunate enough to try wines from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, like every decade from the 40s. And something happened around about the 80s, The 50s and 60s and 70s in particular made these unbelievable dry red wines, they called them, but they were always blends of Cabernet and Shiraz or vice versa. And it wasn't until the 80s came along that the marketers got their snout in the trough and came to this conclusion that the public couldn't handle blends, which was totally wrong, because they'd been drinking blends for ever since we came to this country. But the blends that Australia made were always a blend of Shiraz and Cabernet or vice versa. And these wines, just by coincidence, well, it's not by coincidence, there's a lot of chemistry involved in it, aged unbelievably well. So I started looking at that thinking, what happened in the 80s? We just lost our mind. We all went for the money, which is good. You need a bit of that if you're going to run a winery. But the greatest single offering that Australia had to the rest of the world was a blend of these two varieties. No one else does it. You don't see it in any other country in the world except for Australia. So in my mind, belligerently, I thought this is the great Australian red. And if you look around, probably the most famous example of it is Penfolds 389. Now, I'm not in the business of selling up Penfolds all that often, but they've really stuck at it, and they've turned it into such a fantastic thing. But you look at your Lumber Signature, Ben Glaetzer does a cracker for Glaetzer wines, so on and so forth. There's some really, really beautiful examples. And so in 2002, we got started on it as a project. Back in those days, we didn't really have a formal marketing department, and some days I wish we didn't now. But WUMs actually stands, and it was when George Bush, the president, was in the old weapons of mass destruction. So our drunken marketing department, which came up with its best work at around about midnight, came up with a weapon of mass seduction. So that's what WUM stands for. And it's a blend of Shiraz and Cabernet. And I think out of all of our wines, it'll clearly be the most long-lived. I think it's got a structure that it lends and leans on its bigger brothers in 389 and all those sorts of things. But it's also got just fantastic structure. With Shiraz has often got like a little bit of a soft underbelly, and sometimes it gets a little bit sort of fragile around the middle, and sometimes it definitely lacks sort of power on the entry to the palate and power on the finish of the palate. They are the two single most important features of Cabernet Sauvignon. Absolutely. Is the entry and the exit. That's what it's most famous for. So you hear a lot of people talk about taking Cabernet and softening it down with Merlot. We're taking Shiraz and giving it length with Cabernet. So it's just our version of it, and it never ceases to amaze. Like the 2002 still look like they're only 3-4 years old.
That's fantastic, Matt. And I'll just add another layer to your story. Not a lot of people know this, but one of the most famous Shiraz Cabernet blends is often in several vintages is actually Penfolds Grange. that they are not above putting in a little lick. Usually it's under 15%, so they don't legally have to put it on the label. But you will often see a little lick of Cabernet in Penfolds Grange. So, I mean, if that's not a testament to something that we're doing right, then absolutely, then I don't know what is. And Bozzy, just to reiterate what you were saying, mate, I mean, when I did a presentation to a group of overseas sommeliers from Asia, and we were asked to do a presentation of the wines that express Australian wine the most clearly. And I used 3 wines. I used Hunter Valley Semillon, which Bozzy, I'm sure you would agree, is quintessentially Australian.
Oh, don't get me started.
I used a sparkling Shiraz, which is just so Australian it hurts, and I used Shiraz Cabernet. Those were the 3 wines that to me are quintessentially Australian, and I really adore wines like this. I think wines like this are the reason Australia has been so successful, because we're not tied to the legislative bounds that the Italians and the French, all the Europeans are, and we don't tend to stick to those as strictly. If it tastes great and it sells, go for it. Absolutely go for it. And you know, this is a gorgeous wine, absolutely beautiful. So we're going to just do a little flyover now. We're going to show Luke. I'm going to throw to you, mate.
Yeah, of course.
We're just going to show you where the Woms Vineyard is, okay?
So, Mark, can you see my screen?
Can see your screen, yes.
Fantastic. So we're just zooming back into the Woms again. So, Reid, I was really interested. Obviously, that's the Cabernet strip there. Where do you source the Shiraz from?
Just keep going down. They just right at the bottom of the screen, basically.
Yeah.
So about there.
Fantastic.
There's a little block in there. If you go to the left, there's a little tree all on its own, just a little bit up to the north there. The block to the south of that. Up. Keep going.
That's it.
Luke's just going there because he used to stay there at the. Oh no, you didn't stay at the bunkhouse.
No, not quite. I used to cycle past it a lot though.
That's where the backpackers used to stay. It was the most over-pruned vineyard in Australia. But yeah, it all comes off that block there. And typically with the Woms, we use a higher percentage of not quite pressings wine, but what we call draining. So it's a more concentrated version of tannin. And so the Shiraz and Cabernet that we're looking for in that wine, we're looking for a blend that's really based on palate structure. If the aromatics don't necessarily match up as a young wine, I'm not bothered, because in many ways it's what this wine's going to become as opposed to what it is now. So if it's looking a bit inert and a bit tough and a bit chewy now, that's exactly the way we intended it. And some people like that style of wine. I don't mind it, but again, it's what it's going to be in 10 years' time or 20 years' time.
Now, Bozzy, what are the? Would you have a vine age on these vineyards?
Yep. So for the Woms.
Yeah, for the Woms.
Yeah, the Shiraz component, and so the blend is typically. So what we do is we set up, 5% Cabernet, 95% Shiraz, 10% Cabernet, 90% Shiraz, 15, 85, so on and so forth. This blend always ends up being about 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 Shiraz, 1/3 Cabernet. I keep sort of saying to my winemaking team, like, can we just change it one year so it looks like we're trying, like it's just not some sort of recipe. But that's just where it sort of suits our taste. And the great thing about doing these blends is it becomes very personal. The Cabernet is actually an interesting vineyard. The previous Kaesler that we bought the vineyard from took out half the old bastard vineyard to plant Cabernet. So that vineyard is planted in about 1985. So one of the younger vineyards that we've got. And the Shiraz version, the Shiraz stuff comes from a vineyard that we call Maddie's Old, and that's planted in 1961.
So I do love that you had to drop that in there, planted in 85, and it's one of the youngest vineyards you've got. So,
well, it kind of is. So
it's not quite older than me, but it's pretty bloody close. So,
yeah.
That's great. So that's awesome, mate. So one little story that I will share, and this is one of your contemporaries told me this story, Bozzy, and this was Mr. Henschke from not the Henschke family, the Henschkes with a T,
Okay.
from
Henley Farm.
Henley Farm. And
We used to make all their wine for them.
that's correct, exactly right. So they told me a story, and I'm not sure if this is actual, Bible truth, but they told me a story that historically in Bordeaux, which is obviously Cabernet territory, whenever they would have a kind of a weaker year, they'd take the carts across to the Rhone Valley, and they'd grab a few barrels of Rhone Valley Shiraz, and they'd add it in to the Cabernet to kind of give it a bit more fullness and roundness and plushness and drinkability, basically. And so the Cab Shiraz blend is, I think it's a lot older than we think it is, and it's a lot older than the French will ever admit to it being. But I'm very, very glad that it's here now, and I'm very glad that we're getting to try it because it's absolutely gorgeous. Now,
Yeah, but Mark, what he didn't tell you is the Rhone people that would then go down to the Languedoc and buy their Shiraz and bring it up to the Rhone.
just pass it on.
Yeah, from Minervois.
So, Luke, I might grab control back if that's all right, mate.
Of course.
And we're just going to go to our final page here.
By the
Now-
way, Reid, sorry, Mark, just to jump in there, we're getting a lot of love on the WOMs. I think you should be really proud of that one. Seemingly, a lot of people are enjoying it.
Thank you.
It is. It's to me. That's a sexy wine. It's sleek. It's got power, obviously, but it's sleek and sexy. So I just thought I'd touch on quickly. So this is my own little invention that something that I kind of preach to a lot of winemakers. The honest truth is, and I encourage you to look into the background of the imagery that I'm using here now. These are images taken from Kaesler, and these are these old vines that they have. And as Reid said before, we have the Chaputier potentially coming over to Australia and taking back vines to Europe, because the vines that we have are the original. They are the OG. They are what predates phylloxera. So I think it's, for us, we don't have thousands of years of studying a hill site to see which site does best. We don't have these old stories, millennia old, of monks farming the lands. What we have are some of the oldest vines in the world. And for me, that should be the story of our Grand Cru. That really should. So that's why I've said here, this is the story of Kaesler, and this is Aussie Grand Cru, what I would call Aussie Grand Cru. So I'm just going to go to our next page here. So basically, I just wanted to summarize here very, very quickly what's known as the Old Vine Charter, which was something started a few years ago. Bozzy, would you know, I for the life of me couldn't find when this was started, but it was actually relatively recently that they started doing this.
Jimmy Irvine started it, or started the conversation around it with Robert Hill Smith, and probably Stephen Henschke would have been involved in it.
Sure.
That's the Eden Valley Mafia up there. Jimmy Irvine started it probably about 20 years ago.
Yep.
And the problem was, like if you've got a vine that's a vineyard that's 9 years old and one that's 7 years old, then you're going to call the oldest vines the old vines. So we had to somehow segregate ourselves, not just from other competing regions in Australia, but also other regions around the world.
Yeah, and I think it is an absolutely fantastic idea, and it's been executed fantastically. And this is the story that I think, as Australian winemakers, we should be saying, and as Australian wine drinkers, we should be incredibly proud of, because this is something that the rest of the world just doesn't have. So, you've got your Barossa Old Vine, 35 plus years, the Survivor Vine, which is 70 plus, Centenarian, obviously 100 plus, and then of course these are the rarest of the rare, the Ancestor vines, so 125 years plus. And Bozzy, you guys have got a handful of vineyards that are now classified as ancestor, if I'm not incorrect.
No, that's correct. Just recently, yeah.
Yeah, only I think was it last year or the year before? Yeah, they became ancestors.
Yeah, 1893. So there's 2018, and then got to wait a little bit longer for the other one. But
yeah,
I don't know. Once they get over 70, they all kind of behave a little bit the same. Marketing grabs onto 100, obviously, because it's a bit of a milestone. But
yeah. But I think it's a very, very cool thing to think about. So yeah. So any feedback from our guests here tonight, Luke?
Yeah, again, the Cab Shiraz is going down really nicely. Danny's pairing it up with party pies, which is an unusual food pairing, but a good one.
I would have cracked them open for the Bogan, surely.
But yeah, no, some great feedback. Just a personal question, Reid, and perhaps Mark would like to jump in on it. You sent us over some great pictures of the vines earlier in the week. Perhaps Mark, I don't know if you have them on the slides. You can skip to find an example, and just for us, kind of talk about how an old vine grows. Look at that. I mean, for me, that's amazing.
That's the money shot right there. That's a good one.
Yeah. And what you have to do to look after it, because presumably, it takes a lot of care and attention.
Well, there's no real handbook for it. Like most of the viticulture was originally learnt from European. That's where a lot of the textbooks sort of emanated from. But here in Australia, we've got vines that far exceed anything that they've got in Europe. It's really interesting. Europe always calls us the New World, whereas we've got the oldest soils, the oldest vines, cleaner air, cleaner water, better looking people, the whole smash.
One of the oldest cultures on the planet. Yeah.
Yeah, we're the old world. They're the new world as far as viticulture is concerned. But they require a lot of hand care, a lot of hand tending. All of these vineyards, you've just got to take your time in them. They get quite tender and quite brittle, and you just really have to look after them. Particularly in the old Bosward vineyard, which we're not trying tonight. But these are vineyards that are so old that, like, one vine, like in a forest, starts actually out competing all of its neighbours. And so with that, he can carry a little bit more fruit. You can leave a bit more buds on him at pruning time. So you tend to prune in circles rather than in rows. But it's we're having to learn this as we go, Luke. It's really complicated, and we've got a lot of old vineyards. Like, we've probably got some of the biggest holdings of 8 vineyards planted in the 1800s, certainly in the Barossa, if not the world. So we're just lucky, but we're having to learn a lot on the way, and we probably know more about it than the only person I can think that probably knows more about proper old vine viticulture than anyone is Prue Henschke. She's really applied herself to it, and a lot of what we've learnt, we sort of pick up from her, and just the nature of that family. They're pretty generous with their time and their thoughts. They understand the value of doing it as a regional collective. But yeah, it's a lot of hard work, and you spend a lot of time standing there staring at them, trying to figure out what to do next. But, it's not the stock market. We don't have to rush, and just take our time and let's keep them for another 50 to 100 years if we can.
And Reid, we've had a couple of questions come in about the naming Bogan. How did you come up with that?
Well, when I went to uni, when I went to Roseworthy College, I came from the western suburbs of Sydney, and I was sporting a bit of a mullet back then, and we had some pretty auspicious people in our class, like Pete Gago and Steve Pannell and Nick Hazelgrove and David Babbage. It was a bloody good class, actually. And, pretty daunting, but, running around with a mullet, eventually you got tagged with the name Bogan, and it was pretty clear right from the get-go that Peter Gago has been groomed to go to Penfolds. He was the Ducks and was always going to be the Ducks. But I remember saying to him towards the end of the course that, you might end up making Grange, but I'm going to end up making a wine called the Bogan, and I'm going to make it shit all over Grange, right? And he's just hard. But Penfolds actually do come in and buy, or they want to swap for our wines every year, which they use in their benchmark tasting. So that gives me a great feeling to know that we're at least on their radar. But yeah, it was just, it was a joke. We'd had a particularly good year with our American importer, and this is in like 2001, 2002. And I said to him, here's a wine that we've just kind of made for ourselves. The original 2001 make was only 100 dozen. And he took it back to America, and we put the name Bogan on it just for a bit of an internal joke. He's taken it to America and sold it for astronomical money. He's come back and ordered the 2002 and the 2003 paid up front. So we were thinking we're pretty good. But when he came back, he goes, what does this name mean? Like, what's the relevance of it? And I thought, shit, how am I going to explain this? You know, I can't tell him that it's well, in America, they call it trailer trash or white trash or whatever. So I told him it was a big moth. And he's like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Bit weird, but pretty interesting. Anyway, he's gone and sold another few vintages, and he's come back and said, it's not a big moth at all, is it? I said, no, it's this. But if I had $1 for every time I've had to explain that, what a bogan is to the American public, I wouldn't be making wine. They love it. They've got a great sense of humour, and it's a top place to sell wine. It's a little bit fragile at the moment, but I can promise you when you go there, they really appreciate what we do.
Good man.
Fantastic.
Good man. And I'm sure, you know, if you want to share a photo of you with your mullet, we're happy to receive it.
Oh, yeah, my sister's probably got a couple. It wasn't pretty.
Very good. All right. Well, guys, that pretty much calls it for that's our hour. I can see Danny's got his sausage rolls ready to go straight in the oven there, so we can't keep it too much longer. But we've just the party pies there they are. We've got some party pies, beautiful. But we just need to call the winner of our tasting our bottle tonight. So hopefully you've got your texted your favorite wine in now that you've tried everything. If not, just let us know, and then we will. We've got the names in here. Okay, we've got heaps of names. Beautiful. All right.
Yeah, we had lots of names. So thank you for everybody texting in. Okay, is everybody ready? I'm going to give it a spin now.
Give it a spin.
This is so bogan. I'm just loving this. Heath, you want it?
Heath McKenzie. Beautiful.
Heath, we'll be in touch and organise your favourite wine.
Yeah, Adriana Exenitus is going to drop it over for you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming along tonight. Congratulations, Heath. A massive thank you to Bozzy for your time tonight.
Yeah,
and
no worries.
For your knowledge. Really appreciate it, mate. And it's great to see you, although we have to do it. We can't do it face-to-face, but it's definitely, hopefully we catch up for a beer soon, mate. And all the best to everyone. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. It's been a great night, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.